Hey everyone, welcome back to the Hardware News Recap for the week. Hopefully you can't hear the boiling liquid nitrogen behind me. Don't worry, everything's under control. We'll talk about that later, maybe. NVIDIA, responding to criticisms that we published of its approach to PresentMon. Those were in our DLSS4 and MFG video. Additionally, we'll be talking about, in as neutered a way as possible, some of the tariffs discussion that are affecting the hardware industry potentially. AMD to launch its 9000 series GPUs in, it sounds like March from what the current expectation is. Additionally, AMD beating Intel in data center for the first time in its new earnings report. Some Google news, and we'll be going over ASUS's Q-Release Slim issue with its motherboards, which has been in the news lately for scratching video cards on removal of the card. Let's get into it. Before that, this video is brought to you by Lian Li and the O11D Evo RGB case. The O11D Evo RGB is an updated entry to the famed O11 lineup, retaining heavy support for fan mounts, drive mount locations, and flexibility on component mounting, such as two options for the power supply. The O11D Evo RGB's dual-chamber approach aims to maximize cable storage on the backside to streamline cable management, coupling this with a unique vertical GPU mount to showcase the most expensive part in most systems. Learn more at the link in the description below. All right, first news item, NVIDIA responding to some of our PresentMon comments in the DLSS and MFG video. MFG is multi-frame generation. It's the thing that makes the frame number bigger. We talked about that in a full video. It was actually a really fun and interesting topic. Patrick did the research driving a lot of that. There was a section in it, though, where we spent some time on PresentMon. This is something that I personally care a lot about. So PresentMon is a measurement utility that's open source. It is developed by a lot of different groups, but Intel sort of drives the development. AMD is a part of that now and participates with Intel. Microsoft is part of it, and it's, again, totally open source. So it's something that can be validated publicly, which is really important for measurement utilities when any of the first parties are involved in it, but they also kind of have to be involved in it for reasons we'll talk about in a second. So PresentMon is so good that other tools that most people know, like RTSS, Hardware Info, CapFrameX, these all use or wrap PresentMon in some capacity, and it serves as the core for them. So even if you don't use PresentMon itself, if you're an enthusiast and you use something like Hardware Info, you are using PresentMon just because it's part of it now. So really important utility. Now, one of the things we expressed concern about is that NVIDIA's frame generation is sort of in this unique position where in order to measure it accurately, really one of the best ways to do it right now, unfortunately, is by using FrameView. FrameView is an NVIDIA utility. FrameView wraps an ancient version of PresentMon and then has modified it without recontributing those modifications to the code base that's open sourced. And so it's all basically a black box. We have no idea really what they're doing internally. It's a first-party software utility built by a hardware manufacturer that's closed off with no ability to inspect it externally, and you have to use it to measure the performance of that manufacturer's product. You can see why this would be a concern to a reviewer. So that's kind of the backstory. We talked about that for several minutes in the other video if you're curious, but NVIDIA emailed us a follow-up, and after we published the video, it sent us this, quote, "Had a good watch of the DLSS4 testing video and appreciate you guys taking the time to test it. Wanted to address the discussion from the start of the video. We think PresentMon is a great tool and are actively discussing with Intel how we can better contribute to it." We'll come back to the rest of the quote in a second, but on the PresentMon thing first, so NVIDIA is already using that ancient version of PresentMon as part of its FrameView tool, so they're already familiar with it. We contacted Intel's Tom Peterson, who used to be NVIDIA's Tom Peterson. He confirmed that following our video, NVIDIA has reopened communication and they might be participating in PresentMon. Hopefully that actually comes to fruition. Sounds like it will. And the reason we as reviewers care so much about this really is pretty simple. It comes back to the same thing, which is that only the hardware manufacturers have the level of access and knowledge required to fully tap into what's happening behind the scenes. And they have the relationship with Microsoft that's required for Windows testing especially, where they can work with Microsoft to implement these event monitoring sort of markers at an OS level, get really accurate data, and show us what's truly happening behind the scenes with what's ultimately presented to the screen, whether that's through Present or through Display or whatever. So this is an important tool, and the reality is just that an independent, fully independent software solution doesn't really exist in a way that would have all the features we want in our review process, and this one is just involved in pretty much everything else. So the obvious concern is the one we already stated, but with everyone contributing to the same set of tools, And with those tools being open source, there's this level of checks and balances that are necessary to maintain trust in the tools themselves. And so with Intel, AMD, Microsoft, and plenty of others contributing to PresentMon Core, there is a level of sort of, it's almost like a bipartisan type of situation with the software. It's an agnostic solution, and then likewise, because it's open source, the public can inspect it and look for any sort of malfeasance or wrongdoing or trying to manipulate the results, things like that. So it ticks the boxes needed for trust. Now, with NVIDIA, we're thrilled to hear that NVIDIA is now looking at contributing to PresentMon. That is awesome, and that they are looking to contributing to the open source code base in the same way that the other companies are is also great. The process is really only just beginning here, but we think this is a hugely positive move, and NVIDIA is stepping in the right direction with it. So it's a good sign. If NVIDIA is listening and actually does follow through on this, then awesome. We'll talk about that as soon as we learn more about what they're changing or updating. And the company should be confident enough in its hardware, we think, to just do this. So anyway, NVIDIA also noted this at the end of its email. Quote, for DLSS4 multi-frame generation, we agree with your testing that MS between display change, or milliseconds between display change, is the most suitable way to measure 1% lows. One quick note here on some of the nuance for that. So we don't want this particular aspect of nuance lost, which is that we think animation error is the best way to measure the performance long term. It's still developing though, so that's why it's not really fully in play right now. And so in that respect, yes, milliseconds between display change we think is one of the easiest current options that is well understood for 1% lows. So we're on the same page with NVIDIA there. We just didn't want people to kind of forget about the core of it, which is that we do think animation error is the way to go. It's just at GN we're still exploring this. PresentMon is still implementing it, and it hasn't really gotten widespread reach yet because people are still trying to figure out how to present and display that data, things like that. So it's sort of the usual stepping stone type stuff. But you'll see more of that soon. Overall, this is a positive and welcome development for PresentMon and for NVIDIA. NVIDIA, hopefully, if it wants to maintain FrameView, fine, no problem at all. But participating in what everyone else uses is also excellent. That's really what we need, because there needs to be a base level of trust. And unfortunately, the hardware manufacturers are in the best position to build the tools for measuring the hardware. But if they all go do their own thing, then they start to develop concerns about sort of, is everyone even measuring the same thing or not? So, because there's a lot of ways to do it. All right, next up, while we expected to see more of AMD's upcoming video cards at CES in early January, we didn't. They mentioned them to press, they didn't talk about them on stage, but it looks like AMD is now starting to reveal some more information about its 9070 series GPUs. We think the company held its video cards close to the chest while waiting for NVIDIA to play its hand. As a matter of fact, we have an exclusive clip of AMD's behind-the-scenes strategy, waiting for NVIDIA to strike first. You know, Jimmy wrote 2 card puns into that lead up to a Braveheart clip. Can't say I was expecting that. I was thinking maybe like a poker movie or something, but Braveheart works. We'll take it. With NVIDIA reportedly set to lift review embargoes for its 5070 Ti GPUs on February 19th, BenchLife.info reports that AMD is planning to hold a press conference for its Radeon RX 9000 GPUs towards the end of the month. This might allow the company to steal some of NVIDIA's momentum, especially if the 5070 Ti also releases to a paper launch. AMD VP David McAfee has previously stated, and I think we reported this in a previous episode, that the company's cards will arrive next month, with the VP tweeting in January, quote, Radeon 9000 series hardware and software are looking great, and we're planning to have a wide assortment of cards available globally. Can't wait for gamers to get their hands on the cards when they go on sale in March, end quote. As we're in the middle of writing this, AMD CEO Lisa Su more recently stated in a Q4 earnings call, quote, in gaming graphics, revenue declined year over year as we accelerated channel sellout in preparation for the launch of our next-gen Radeon 9000 series GPUs. Our focus with this generation is to address the highest volume portion of the enthusiast gaming market with our new RDNA 4 architecture. RDNA 4 delivers significantly better ray tracing performance and adds support for AI-powered upscaling technology that will bring high-quality 4K gaming to mainstream players when the first Radeon 9070 series GPUs go on sale in early March, end quote. Publication Video Cards reports that the 9070 XT and 9070, based upon rumors that are currently out there, will both have 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory, along with a 256-bit memory bus and 20 gigabit per second memory speed. Currently, we're not expecting GDDR7 on the new AMD cards. Where the cards will allegedly differ is that the 9070 XT will have 4096 cores, this is rumored right now, versus the 9070's 3584. The publication also notes that the boost clocks on both cards will be different, with the 9070 XT featuring what it claims will be a roughly 2.97 GHz frequency compared to the 9070's 2.52 GHz boost clock. Now, although the AMD executive quotes are official, the video cards information here remains unfinalized at this time. Sometimes it's just not fully accurate, or sometimes the manufacturers will actually change it in the lead into the launch. So that could still move around. The publication generally has a good track record, but we'll see what AMD does as we run into the 9000 series launch. Next up, seemingly taking a page out of Intel's playbook, NVIDIA now has some stability concerns as reported online for its 50 series. That'd be the 5090 and 5080 Blackwell GPUs. Tom's Hardware reports that stability issues were initially thought to derive from PCIe 5.0 compatibility problems. The publication notes that other considerations involved a suggested design flaw surrounding Founders Edition cards specifically, causing, quote, PCIe signal integrity degradation, end quote. However, the issue appears to be affecting non-FE cards as well, maybe calling into question that premise, and that's in addition to 5090D, or Dragon GPUs, which are China exclusive. Another theory is that drivers are to blame for this. Elaborating on the issue, Tom's Hardware writes this, quote, several users report GPU initialization failures and black screens after installing the latest drivers from NVIDIA. In one instance, the RTX 5080 only works in PCIe 2.0 mode. A driver rollback reportedly solves most of these problems. However, a subset of users report their GPU is no longer recognized by their motherboard or Windows, making it impossible to roll back drivers, end quote. Now, as an aside here, in testing a card that we haven't posted a review for yet, it's a 5080, it's one of the partner models, I ran into a thing where upon reboot after switching to BIOS, it threw an error and it switched to CSM compatibility mode in BIOS. I was able to reset that back to the default off state for what we were using at the time, and then it booted, but it did seem to have that issue where it was just booting into black screens repeatedly until we messed around with that setting. So maybe that'll help someone out there. But there are also limited drivers that support the 50 series right now because it's still new, and so rollbacks are really limited in how much you can roll back. So we used press drivers for the reviews. This is common. The press driver is typically either a final driver that goes out with the public launch, or it is the last version before a public launch, or it's got most of the features, but not 100% of them, or things like that. So it's pretty close to final release. But the point of bringing it up is that for a full launch for a product with a public driver launch, there may be slight differences in there as well. Currently, there doesn't seem to be any sort of consensus, at least at the time we're filming this, as to what's causing the issue. If you're having a problem with stability with the 50 series cards, then email us. You can email us at tips@gamersnexus.net. Other than that one instance with the partner model that I just mentioned, which has been resolved, we're not seeing the problem that's being described online. So if one of you has that problem, it would help us a lot if we could get some information from you and potentially borrow or buy the card to see if we can replicate it here. If we borrow it, we'd basically plug it in, try your replication steps, and then send it back. So anyway, that would be helpful for us trying to isolate the issue. We sent, however, an undercover camera operator to NVIDIA's customer service headquarters because we needed to know how they were responding to this. Here's what we caught.
Hello, IT? Have you tried turning it off and on again?
Up next, while we're on Tom's for news, we'll go over some more AMD news that they've reported on. During a Q4 earnings call, AMD revealed that its data center chips have outsold Intel's for the first time, generating a record $3.86 billion in net revenue. This represents a nearly 70% year-over-year gain. Intel, in comparison, generated $3.4 billion. That's for this segment. AMD CPUs in the desktop and laptop market also saw tremendous growth, with net revenue rising substantially year over year, totaling $2.31 billion. The company's latest 9000 series CPUs have no doubt contributed to this, but in particular, processors like the 9800 X3D, which that one's been continually sold out. The blight on AMD's earnings call came by the way of the company's GPUs. Tom's Hardware reports, quote, its gaming business struggled in the fourth quarter, with net revenue declining to $563 million, or 59% less compared to the same time frame in the previous year. The operating income of the unit plunged 78% year over year to just $50 million. The major decline being the result of lower sales of Radeon discrete GPUs, as well as system-on chips for Microsoft Xbox and Sony's PlayStation game consoles, end quote. We can't say we're too surprised by this. The 9000 series GPUs were in the rumor mill already at the end of last year. Coming out in March means that'll slow some of the sales. They may have slowed production as well. And then additionally, the PlayStation 5 and Xbox are just pretty old at this point, so the sales have slowed down on those. All right, next up, we're getting into some tariff news here. It directly affects the industry. As you all know, our policy here for reporting on this kind of stuff is to stay out of the politics of it. So we'll bring you the news and what we know right now, and we'll stop there. The current administration recently issued an executive order that puts a 10% tariff on imported Chinese goods. There are other tariffs in discussion, but we'll focus on this one because it directly affects the industry most immediately. This is in addition to tariffs that the administration previously imposed during the 2016 term in office. These new tariffs are expected to increase the prices of electronics as well as other goods imported from China to the U.S. The administration has also stated that the U.S. would specifically be putting tariffs on computer chips, which would implicate Taiwan and South Korea as well, as they lead the world's production of semiconductors. While the production of semiconductor fabrication facilities is ramping up domestically in the U.S., with Arizona being a specific hotbed with TSMC and Intel building out fabs in the area, and you can check out our Intel fab video if you want to see more of that, the domestic scene currently isn't mature or robust enough to handle the overwhelming demand of the tech industry, with even Intel relying on TSMC to produce many of its chips overseas. NVIDIA has almost all of its silicon manufactured in Taiwan, although has used Samsung for various things in the past. And of course, memory manufacturers are a different story. Despite NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang meeting with the president recently, the president stated to the public, quote, "Eventually we're going to put tariffs on chips, we're going to put tariffs on oil and gas. That'll happen fairly soon, I think around the 18th of February, end quote." The president added that the U.S. would also increase tariffs on steel, aluminum, and eventually copper. If done, this would also likely impact the hardware industry and, of course, beyond, but we don't cover other industries that much. Now, aluminum and copper are heavily used in electronics. Whether it's brought here to be used in electronics is a different story. A lot of it is used overseas already, which are would be taxed as fully complete products for the most part coming into the U.S. But as an example of where aluminum and copper are used in electronics, you'd see it in heat sinks, in all the circuit traces and PCBs, things like that. Again, most of that would be deployed overseas where the PCB is printed or made, but some of it does happen here as well. So for basics of tariffs, if the U.S. levies a 10% tariff on foreign goods, then it's American companies importing these goods that will pay the tariff, and the added fees are then often passed to the consumers at checkout. There's potentially additional markup on that as well. So that means that importers in the U.S. or manufacturers in the U.S. who are making something overseas and bringing it in will be paying the cost of this, which will affect margin and could affect, or likely will affect, the end pricing of the products. Now, currently, as far as Gamers Nexus, we're aware of at least one computer hardware factory that is investigating its options to open a factory in, I think they were talking about Vietnam or Thailand as a potential avenue for bringing their production elsewhere outside of China, and that would be to avoid some of the tariffs. Major factories for PC hardware are primarily located in Taiwan, South Korea, and China. We've been to a lot of them in Taiwan and in China previously. There's a couple located in Vietnam and Thailand, not a whole lot, but after the last round of tariffs, we were already reporting on and are aware of now several factories moving their operations from China over to Taiwan or ramping their existing operations there. So for example, Gigabyte has a Taiwan-based factory. It's pretty high-end. We've been there before. They ramped production at that facility with some of the previous round of tariffs because they were applied to imports from China, but not from Taiwan, and they were able to manufacture their video cards or motherboards definitely fully in Taiwan, or fully enough to be imported from Taiwan rather than China. Now, China has responded to the most recent round of tariffs with tariffs of its own, particularly in regards to fuel and agricultural equipment, but also on rare earth metals, which are used in a variety of electronics. These include computer chips, memory modules, displays, and more. Polytechnique Insights reports that as of 2023, China accounts for, quote, 69% of the world's production of rare earth elements, end quote. In addition, Hot Hardware reports that the, quote, Chinese State Administration for Market Regulation commenced an inquiry into allegations that Google violated anti-monopoly laws, end quote, but didn't provide further details. While Google is basically banned in China, having officially pulled its search engine from the country in 2010, the publication surmises that Google may still be caught in the crossfire due to the prominence of Android phones and Google-related advertising in the country. Speaking of our overlords Google, several publications recently caught Google updating its public AI policies, and it removed its promise to not use AI for weapons and surveillance. Using archive.org to view the company's old AI principles page, we can see that under the Our Principles section, Google previously wrote, quote, "While we are optimistic about the potential of AI, we recognize that advanced technologies can raise important challenges that must be addressed clearly, thoughtfully, and affirmatively. These AI principles describe our commitment to developing technology responsibly and work to establish specific application areas we will not pursue," end quote. Under the applications we will not pursue section, the company previously listed, quote, "weapons or other technologies whose principal purpose or implementation is to cause or directly facilitate injury to people," and, quote, "technologies that gather or use information for surveillance violating internationally accepted norms," end quote, both of which have been removed from the updated site. Now, of course, Google already has said something. It probably preempted it. Here's what it had to say.
In 3 years, Cyberdyne will become the largest supplier of military computer systems.
Totally unrelated, but Google's old slogan was, "Don't be evil." Anyway, next up, several reports about ASUS's Q-Release Slim motherboards. Whew. Getting back to the simple hardware topics. I think we navigated those pretty well. All right, several reports have highlighted a possible design flaw in ASUS's Q-Release system. If you're not familiar with it, they have a couple versions of this now, but the latest one is video card goes in the slot, and then to remove it, instead of pushing any kind of latch or mechanism at all, you tilt it, and then you remove it from the slot, and that's how it works. So this is in addition to their previous implementation. It's a heavy card, where you push the button to release the latch. So the report is that there's cosmetic damage to the GPU's PCIe connector with concerns of scratching on the gold pins as well. Now, as we get into this, some quick behind the scenes on something we do here. So we've published a report on this topic. It's on gamersnexus.net. And what that is sometimes for these different stories that are developing in the industry, I'll ask someone on the team to compile all the resources and basically, hey, go hunt down the primary sources for this story and figure out what's happening, and then put a report together that says whether we should do a full video on this, or if this is maybe just hardware news, or if it's not a story at all. And so typically we just use this internally and we don't do anything with it, but I mean, it's a great collection of resources. Tannen worked on this one on the team and did an awesome job with sort of formatting and collecting the information, the primary sources, all the links, and made it really easy for me to figure out, okay, this is hardware news, not a full story. But what's cool about it is we're just going to start publishing those on the website. If people like it, we'll do more of them. But anyway, that's over on gamersnexus.net. It's basically a collection of resources from this story. Maybe it'll be useful in the future if this develops into something more. But on the very least, you've got kind of like one spot that just gives you the timeline of what's going on with the Q-Release thing, and Tannen did a good job on it. So that's over on gamersnexus.net if you want to check it out. All right, getting into the report. Unico's hardware showed these before and after results of installing and removing an ASUS Prime RTX 4060 Ti OC 8GB. And believe it or not, the name isn't the problem here. The card was installed and removed 60 times by editor Labby from Unico's hardware on an ROG Strix X870A gaming Wi-Fi motherboard, which features the Q-Release Slim mechanism. This was the result after just 3 removals. It's difficult to notice, but it appears to us that every install and removal of the GPU could cause extremely minor cosmetic damage to the inside corner of the PEG power section of the PCIe connector. But the damage isn't really noticeable for most of the process. At 60 removals and installations, it was definitely noticeable though. Unico's hardware seems to mostly follow ASUS's guidelines for unplugging the card. However, they may not have exaggerated the, as ASUS calls it, slight tilt as much as ASUS would have preferred. Now, this is a pretty new feature. So ASUS released its Q-Release previously, but Q-Release Slim, the new one, was launched in August of 2024. They showcased it at Gamescom of 2024, so it's basically brand new here. And this came after the original Q-Release mechanism that ASUS unveiled, and I think it was 2021. At the time of writing this, ASUS's motherboard product page lists 16 SKUs of motherboards with a Q-Release Slim mechanism. In response to the claims of damage, ASUS posted a press release on January 31st that included detailed instructions on how to use the Q-Release Slim mechanism, along with these 2 illustrations. The illustration highlighting a 2-degree tilt was not included with ASUS's original documentation of using the Q-Release Slim, but ASUS believes it should help with possible issues. ASUS's press release acknowledges the concern, but claims this is only cosmetic damage to the GPU PCIe connector, motherboard unaffected, that will not impact, it says, the performance or the card functionality. It also noted that there were no reported issues on the original Q-Release non-slim mechanism, making it seem like they possibly overcomplicated things in their attempts to simplify the design. When asked about warranty claims, which is definitely the concern here, in a comment on the Reddit thread, an ASUS North America representative responded with this, quote, "We note that if there is an issue caused by the Q-Release Slim slot, we'll take care of end users in the North America region. I make that distinction because I only cover the NA region. In addition to some level of wear by inserting and removing the card, you can also slightly scratch the gold fingers when you miss the slot or set it down on a rough surface, etc. But this kind of wear doesn't typically damage the card in a way that prevents it from normal operation, and purely cosmetic scratches shouldn't void the warranty." The word shouldn't here is hugely problematic. There really just needs to be a hard commitment of cosmetic scratches will not void the warranty, period. Why? Because they're cosmetic scratches, especially if they're caused by ASUS's other product. And we'll get back into this, but the biggest concern we have here is warranties unrelated to this entirely that would be carried by non-ASUS manufacturers. We'll come back to that. Now, up next in the report, found via PC World, Andreas Schilling of Hardware Lux posted on Blue Sky saying, quote, "I have made a schematic drawing of what the problem is in my case. It's not always possible to create the necessary angle because of the back of the case," end quote, along with these pictures illustrating his issue. At the time of writing this, ASUS has not responded to the issues with creating the angle that's needed to use the Q-Release Slim mechanism. So currently, our kind of synopsis of this is that it looks like this isn't a major functionality issue. It appears to be mostly cosmetic after lots of insertion and removal cycles. Most users won't go through that. So that much is good. Our biggest concern, again, comes back to the warranty situation. Why? Well, no reason. Just ASUS's history. So where is the damage? Oh, there it is. That's $200. So the concern is if a user buys something like a gigabyte video card, installs it in an ASUS Q-Release Slim motherboard, and then in a year, totally unrelated to the motherboard, the video card dies. A MOSFET blows up, an inductor blows up, GPU blows up, whatever. It doesn't have to be an explosion. They're just more interested in. So the video card dies, user sends it in. Does that then create a situation, this is an actual question, where Gigabyte or some other manufacturer would look at the slot and potentially without ever even investigating it further, go, wow, there's a lot of scratches on this, or there's like damage to the PCIe connector, there's scratches on the gold pins that connect into the socket. It's not, it may be cosmetic, but doesn't necessarily look cosmetic at first glance. Does that create a scenario where the warranty claim is rejected? And we don't know the answer to that. It's not rhetorical. So if it does, there's a big problem because now it's not an ASUS product. And so there's a lot less room to go back to ASUS and say, well, your product did this to your product. I maintain it. The death of the product was caused by something entirely different, but even if it's not, it was your product with your product. Therefore, I insist you replace my device. If it's a different company, it's much harder of an argument to make. So if that happens to anyone, we'd love to hear about it. It'll probably be sometime in the future, I'm sure, because there'd have to be some failures first. And we really don't know what that's going to look like. What we do know is that ASUS has an absolutely atrocious warranty history, and I still, to this day, get dozens of emails a week sometimes about ASUS warranty problems, and a lot of them I completely agree with the user. So anyway, it looks like the actual Q-Release Slim thing may be cosmetic and not a huge concern. It just does come back to that warranty problem. So, and if you want the written version of our research report with all the links and everything, you can go to gamersaccess.net and grab it. That's where Tannen compiled it all and linked all the external sources and primary sources for it. All right, next up, on January 30th, ASUS officially confirmed pricing of 45090 and 45080 variants to what it says is review media. And it also posted in a Reddit thread via a North America representative. As noted by a Reddit user in a separate thread, less than a week later, it appears that ASUS has already increased prices, as seen on its product page at the time of writing this. Depending on the SKU, the originally suggested retail pricing of ASUS's 5090 cards ranged from $2,300 to $3,100, which has since increased already to $2,530 to $3,410 at the high end. The original 5080's retail price from ASUS ranged from $1,150 to $1,500 and has increased to $1,264 to $1,650 with a so-called special launch pricing of $1,000 for their lowest tier 5080 card. So much for MSRP. We're gonna get rid of that. Now it's gonna be SLP, I guess. It's the special launch pricing. What's the long-term price? Who the f knows? NVIDIA's 5080 MSRP is listed at $1,000 and the 5090 MSRP is $2,000, meaning on the high end, ASUS's 5080s and 5090s will cost 65% and 70.5% more, originally 50 and 55%. And on the low end, they'll cost 26% and 26.5% more, originally 15%. Some Reddit users note that ASUS increasing its prices from originally announced prices may be caused due to the recent tariffs that we already talked about. And this might support our tinfoil hat theory that we proposed in the paper launch video. I was looking for a tinfoil hat. I don't really have one. It's aluminum, but it probably costs more now. Anyway, the tinfoil hat theory from the paper launch video was NVIDIA launching the devices early, even if it has no supply, allows it to set the MSRP lower. And then if the street price goes up later because of tariffs and other things, then, well, we already launched, it's out of our control. That's just the street pricing. We can't control that after launch. And so it does kind of give some cover fire for that. But again, that was a tinfoil hat theory. We talked about some of the more likely reasons in that paper launch video. Just wanted to bring it up again because it is one to think about. Now, we've previously covered ASUS's variants of the 5080 and 5090 cards in more depth in our 50 series clown car video. If you want to learn more, you can watch that video. In the very least, it's a fun watch, but we would absolutely advise against spending $3,410 on a 5090 or $1,650 for a 5080, because we would also advise against spending $1,000 for a 5080, so $1,650 is insane. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. As always, subscribe for more. Go to store.gamersnexus.net if you want to help us out directly, like by grabbing our PC building mod mats, our soldering and project mats with high heat resistance, or our other stuff on the store, and we'll see you all next time.